Scotland, 1440. Two young brothers were riding toward Edinburgh Castle, invited to dine with their king. Neither knew they were riding into one of medieval Scotland's darkest mysteries. 3 years earlier, King James I had been assassinated, leaving the Scottish crown to his 10-year-old son, James II. But while a child sat upon the throne, powerful nobles competed for control of his kingdom. None were more formidable than the Black Douglases. Their lands, castles, and influence stretched across Scotland, and at their head stood 16-year-old William Douglas, young, enormously wealthy, and powerful enough to make the men surrounding the king afraid. Soon, William would receive an invitation he could not refuse. William Douglas had inherited more than a title. Castles, estates, wealth, and loyal retainers gave the 16-year-old extraordinary power. Across southern Scotland, Douglas' influence rivaled the authority of the crown itself. Inside Edinburgh Castle, powerful men watched that influence with growing concern. What they decided behind closed doors remains uncertain. Then came an invitation. William and his younger brother David were summoned to Edinburgh to dine with the young King James II. Nothing about it appeared threatening. William accepted, and the brothers set out confidently for the capital. As Edinburgh Castle appeared on the horizon, they believed a royal welcome awaited them. But somewhere beyond those walls, a feast was being prepared that Scotland would remember for centuries. Scotland had a king, but at just 10 years old, how much power did James II truly possess? Inside the royal court, experienced nobles and officials conducted the business of government around the child monarch. Power did not rest in one place. Edinburgh and Stirling became important centers in a kingdom shaped by competing political interests. Among the most influential figures was Chancellor William Crichton, closely associated with Edinburgh and the royal government. Alexander Livingston was another powerful figure with influence over the young king and royal household. James wore the crown, but around him stood ambitious, experienced men with interests of their own. And beyond their political rivalry lay an even greater problem: the extraordinary power of the Douglas family. The real threat was not William's age. It was the power behind his name. Lands, castles, wealth, and alliances stretched across Scotland, yet the surviving accounts leave crucial questions unanswered. Then came the royal invitation, summoning William and David to Edinburgh. Edinburgh finally appeared before them. William and David had no reason to turn back. They had been summoned by their king. Leaving the vast Douglas lands behind, the brothers rode toward the royal stronghold towering above the capital. The gates of Edinburgh Castle opened. No soldiers seized them. No warning was given. Instead, William and David entered as honored guests. Inside, officials welcomed them while servants took their horses. Everything suggested safety. Then William was brought before James II. And here lies the chilling irony. Scotland's feared Douglas Lord was only 16. The king supposedly threatened by his power was barely 10. They greeted one another not as enemies, but as boys. Yet around them stood the powerful men who truly governed Scotland. Inside Edinburgh Castle, everything appeared normal. Kitchens prepared the royal feast, musicians played, and servants carried food toward the hall. But beyond the celebration, something quietly changed. Guards took their positions, heavy doors were closed, access through the castle became increasingly controlled. William and David noticed nothing. They ate beside the young King James, talking and smiling while powerful men watched from the shadows. Then the story enters darker territory. Later accounts claim the feast suddenly took a terrifying turn, a tradition that would transform this dinner into legend. A servant approached the table carrying a covered platter. No one moved. No one yet knew what waited beneath it, and when it was finally revealed, the meaning was unmistakable. Then the feast changed. A servant approached carrying a covered platter. According to later accounts, when the lid was raised, a black bull's head appeared, a chilling symbol traditionally associated with death. The music stopped. William suddenly noticed the guards. David looked toward his brother, while even the young King James seemed bewildered by what was unfolding around him. The hospitality was over. William and David were now at the mercy of men far more powerful than the child sitting on Scotland's throne. James wore the crown, but he was only 10 years old. And as the Douglas brothers disappeared from the feast, the terrible truth became clear. The invitation to Edinburgh had never guaranteed they would leave. The doors of the feast were now behind them. William stayed close to David as the brothers were led deeper into Edinburgh Castle. Later accounts describe a hurried judgment for treason, but exactly what happened inside those walls remains uncertain. What is certain is far darker. William Douglas and his younger brother David would not leave the castle alive. As night closed over Edinburgh, the two brothers faced their fate together. They had entered expecting royal hospitality. Instead, both were killed at Edinburgh Castle. And when the hall finally fell silent, two chairs stood empty beside a 10-year-old king. The black dinner was over. But Scotland's struggle between the crown and the powerful Douglas family was only beginning.